Welcome back to Capital Conversations. I'm Marty Owings.
And I'm Andi Friedel.
We're pleased now to be joined by GOP Senator, that's a Republican for those of you who are just tuning in, Senator Ted Daley, representing Eagan and that community. What district is that?
Nice to meet you. Currently it's Senate District 38, but after the redistricting it will change to Senate District 51.
Senate District 51. Okay, very good.
Do you have any competition?
Well, there are two Democrat contestants who are competing right now, and this weekend they'll have their endorsement race, and it's Mayor Mike McGuire and former Senator Jim Carlson.
I see. And then also joining us tonight is one-time gubernatorial candidate and publisher and media, well, we'll say mogul.
Mogul, right?
Mogul, media mogul. Rob Hahn.
Keep it going, keep it going. It sounds better the more you talk. Good to be here.
Good to have you on the program, Rob.
All right, let's start off right away. We in the last segment we talked a little bit about the voter ID bill, which the House is debating right now. Are we going to see it in the Senate later in the week?
We will certainly see it in the Senate. I don't know exactly when. Just very quickly, I'll say that I'm supportive of it, and it polls at about 80% is what I've seen. You look at KSTP polls, you look at Star Tribune, lots of different polls, and the numbers that I saw were anywhere between maybe 75 and 80%. So it's a very strong support kind of thing with the people in basically all over the state of Minnesota.
Now, Minnesota Public Radio today on their website, they said that there have been lots and lots of people here testifying against the bill, but not a ton of people for it, supporters of it. Have you noticed that in
I don't think
hearings?
That's perhaps in the hearings, and it certainly does matter, but I don't think it's indicative of the sentiment of the overall population. It just seems from the phone calls I get, out on the street, emails that I'm receiving, people are very, very supportive. They're really surprised when they go to the poll that they're not required to show their ID. So many people are just, I don't know if the right word is flabbergasted, surprised for sure that they go to vote and they don't have to show any ID. And the vast majority of people think that that's a common sense, fair-minded kind of measure.
Rob Hahn, I think you talked about this issue during the campaign, if I recollect a little bit. It wasn't a huge issue here in Minnesota at the time, but well, let's get your take on that. Is that what do you hear?
You know, I'm not sure that many people really care about it. To be perfectly honest, I think it's become this legislative passion, either for or against. Getting to what Paul said earlier in the program, I'm worried about the legal costs that are going to arise and the time the courts are going to have to spend on it, because it's pretty clear that even if it passes, we're going to get into a legal quagmire. And is it really worth it? I'm not sure I have the answer to that. Maybe you have a stronger opinion.
I won't speculate about the court costs, but I think integrity of our system is really important. And there are a lot of people out there that feel disenfranchised, that their vote isn't counting, and they want to make sure that when they vote that it counts.
I feel that way, Senator, but the data doesn't support that from everything you hear from both the secretaries of state, the former Secretary of State Mary Kiffmeyer, who's a Republican, and the current Secretary of State Mark Ritchie. Both say we have a pretty clean election law and pretty clean election record, and 1 or 2 cases in the last 150 plus years of our state's history have ever been convicted of actually voting twice now, or actual voter fraud. Now, there's been people who have voted fraudulently or because they were a convicted felon and got out of prison. So I just challenge you on that statement. Is it really a question of the system being lacking integrity, or is this just a way to sort of address is it a solution looking for a problem?
I don't think it's a solution looking for a problem. I think what we're going to do is we're going to put it on the ballot. It'll be a constitutional amendment question to the people. And at the end of the day, I trust the common sense, good-hearted people of Minnesota to make the right decision.
Well, that and solid poll data. You mentioned it can't hurt. As a former officer at West Point, you never go into battle unless you're fully prepared anyway. Remember that. Rob Hahn, you Well, so you're on this issue. You're concerned about the legal costs, but
well, not only that, I'm concerned not just with this issue, but the trend that seems to be percolating throughout the legislative session.
We should mention that Rob Hahn ran as an independent, not a Democrat.
Right, right. I don't like this governing by amendment. I think we elect our legislators supposedly to find some sort of consensus, not only among themselves, but with the governor as well. And it seems that we're trying to circumvent the executive branch in too many cases.
Well, hang on. I mean, what are when there are big questions that the people feel like they want to have a voice in, such as, you know, maybe same-sex marriage or, you know, voter ID or right to work, any of that?
You bring up same-sex marriage. I think the state should get out of the marriage license business and just have civil union licenses and let the individual churches and religions deal with whether they want to recognize same-sex marriage. To me, to have an amendment on the ballot that bans something that's not even legal is preposterous. It's a waste of time and it's a waste of money. It's only benefiting, in most cases, those who have these inherent biases and the media corporations who are going to be the recipient of millions of dollars in advertising come this fall. And it bothers me as a Minnesotan. I always thought we would be a little more open-minded and willing to accept different views, not trying to legislate it through an amendment. Well, what do you think, Senator, about getting out of the marriage license business and just making it a civil union license and let the church handle?
I just say in general, having experienced combat in Iraq.
It's okay if Hahn takes over the show. He's used to it. He's in the media.
Having experienced combat in Iraq and seeing how challenging the system is there, I think it's great that we have the freedom of the press, we have freedom of speech, we can have this kind of debate here. And, you know, at the end of the day, we put it out to the people and let the people vote on it. And again, I mentioned it before, I just think we should trust the good-hearted, common-sense people of Minnesota to make the right decision on some of these very important issues.
Well, your former organization made a decision and they decided to do away with Don't Ask, Don't Tell and to allow soldiers to be openly gay in the military. Well, what was your position on that at the time?
As an officer, you support the commander-in-chief. And that's why I didn't get involved in politics when I was on active duty. It's really important that you take a nonpartisan, non-political, apolitical position in all of those things. So as an active duty Army officer, I didn't have a position on that. It's important to, again, to support the commander-in-chief and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs and all the commanders all the way down. As you mentioned before, you were in the Army, and so I'm sure you understand that very well.
I was in before that, but Don't Ask, Don't Tell was the policy when I was in. And but anyway, go ahead, Andy. But I had an opinion at the time, you know. I'm saying, did you have an opinion at the time?
Again, you know, as an active duty officer, it's really important to be apolitical.
So at the time you didn't have an opinion, but now, reflecting on it, do you have an opinion?
You know, it's one of those. He's
not your commander-in-chief anymore, sir.
Well, I'm an active duty, or I'm an Army Reserve active component, or I shouldn't say active component, in the Army Reserve, active as a lieutenant colonel in the Army Reserve. So it's still important, I think, on certain things with respect to that institution.
You better not say anything, that's for sure. Yeah, no, I see where you're coming from. Go ahead, Andy, sorry.
Well, let's kind of get back to this idea of the gridlock. One of the things that came out, Phil Krinke of the Taxpayers League of Minnesota was basically wrote an editorial this week and said, legislators, go home. You're not getting anything done. There's a budget surplus now. And
he basically, yeah.
And so he wasn't very happy, but he talked about...
It was a smackdown of epic proportions.
One of the things he said, the legislature has passed 14 of the 2,062 bills introduced. Governor Dayton has signed 8 into law and vetoed 6. So,
now, you know if I was a soldier and performing like that, you'd have me Article 15 and sent home.
Well, it depends. If you've got one of those that Governor Dayton signed into law, you'd be pretty happy.
All right.
And I'm proud to admit that I have one of those.
You know?
I think, well, in fact, it was the first one that he signed into law in 2012, the basic skills exam.
Okay, good.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Well, you were one of the lucky few, according to Krinke.
So, but
I understand his sentiment to a certain degree.
Are you frustrated? Yeah.
You know, if you look back, I think 1972 was the first year, somewhere in that time frame was the first time that we had sessions every year, because prior to that, it was every other year. And I talked to a former senator, Bob Brown, and he said that up to that point we didn't need it, and he, to a certain degree, he regrets having done that. It was to have a bonding focus for that even-numbered year, and we haven't really talked much about bonding this year as far as in the circles that I'm in. That's K-12 education, that is state gov and veterans, and jobs, the Jobs and Economic Development Committee. And really my focus is private sector job creation. Sure. Every chance I get, that's my focus.
Well, jobs.
And that's really important.
Kept saying that, but
private sector job creation, what can we do? Well, does the government create jobs, or do we as legislators help set the conditions and create a conducive environment for those private sector job creation? Well, so what are some of the things that they're looking at? It's a better tax environment, reducing the amount of regulations. I've got a couple of bills related to the regulatory environment. It's about healthcare costs and reducing those. It's about reducing energy costs so that
more business friendly.
It is. You know, it's not about a stimulus program and more spending, really. For that helps short term, perhaps, but in the long term, what you need is a better environment, a more certain environment.
Well,
that with predictability, so these job creators can come into Minnesota, set up business, and those great corporations that we have here will stay
here. No, I can appreciate what you're saying, Senator. Before you jump in, Rob, I just have a question for you. You know, putting all the political rhetoric aside for a minute, you know, what do you say to people that come up to you if the courage to confront you on these issues and go, look, Senator, you're up there doing our bidding, you're making laws. I got a real problem because Wall Street fleeced me like 3 times. You know, once they ruined my 401k, then they foreclosed on my house, then they stole my money again. You know, the people are very angry about business, and yet you guys are the cheerleaders for business, business. It's like this tax cut that Demko was talking about earlier. It's this, can we make it more business friendly? When are we going to start addressing like these, okay, tax cuts for business? What about the tax cuts for the middle class and the folks out there? I always try to give Republicans an opportunity to say, hey, we're for the middle class. We want to do that, but you're off to you.
Boy, I tell you, you're right on the money. I am absolutely for the middle class. And there are so many things that we can do to help them. Raising their taxes isn't one of them. How do you help somebody help themselves? There's a number of different things, but it's not just a focus on large corporations. It's also for that mom and pop shop.
Right.
We want them to have the opportunity to flourish as well.
The real engine, I guess.
Well, it takes both. You know, it takes both. It takes all of us. We're all in this together. And to pick on the poorest of the poor, I don't think is right. To pick on the rich because they're so evil and awful. I mean, when I think about it, I think about people who want to win the lottery. But there are people that buy a lottery ticket once a week, maybe some even once a day. Why is it that they want to buy this lottery ticket? They want to get rich. Why do they want to get rich?
Saying that, Senator Daley.
Will they be evil and awful because they
Oh, she will be. Oh, she will turn into Darth Vader, I guarantee. But no,
we envy them because we want to be one of them.
Yeah.
And if you were to become one, I think it's just really important to remember the little guy. And they do, to a large degree. You look at what Bill Gates is doing. He and Melinda are doing fabulous things for education, for poor people around the world. They're spending millions and hundreds of millions of their fortune to help those who are unfortunate. So, I mean, we're all in it together.
Right. No, I can appreciate that. Rob Hahn, what about this whole idea that this is just class warfare when we bring these issues up, or that we discuss this stuff?
I don't think it's class warfare. I'm very pro-business as well, although I kind of take a different approach to some of the tactics here at the Capitol. Bonding, I would argue, is probably the most important thing that's going to be done this session. So why is it taking so long, I wonder, for us to see, get a peek at the House's bonding proposal? We still haven't seen the Senate's, unless I'm mistaken, right? Isn't that coming later this week, supposedly?
I'm not on the Capital Investment Committee. I'm not sure exactly when.
It's big dollars, and it's a big part of this this phase of the session, and it frustrates me as a taxpayer. It is a job. I mean, bonding by nature is a job creator. I agree with you that it should be government's sole role to create jobs, but when the infrastructure or different aspects of cities need improvement, and there's a bonding bill.
Well, I mean, he didn't say it was government's job to create jobs.
No,
he said the opposite. I think it's government's job.
Right.
Oh,
I'm
okay.
agreeing with you
on
that.
Right,
but at the same time, bonding by itself does spur economic growth.
Right. Okay.
And I think we just have to make sure it's done wisely. I think tax cuts for businesses are appropriate to a certain extent. Property tax relief, I think, would be good. There was a time on the campaign trail in my budget where I said, let's get rid of the corporate tax completely. It constitutes such a small portion of the overall general fund that we could adapt differently. Let's get beyond this argument over right to work. Probably the dumbest thing I've ever heard of. It would be like you or me saying, we want to be citizens of Minnesota, but we're not going to pay taxes. If we don't feel like paying taxes. The unions represent their members. They go to work for their members to get wages, to get benefits, to set them up with the pensions. And I'm as critical of certain unions as anybody for not having adapted to the times. Look what the steel unions did because they couldn't adapt. But to say that you should allow people to work for a union but not have to pay dues, that's preposterous. I mean, why should they get the benefits? Can I go to a car dealer and say, "Man, I like this car. I think I'm just going to drive off the lot instead of paying anything for it"? That goes against capitalism. We should be focused more on actually creating jobs, making sure, number one, that the unions don't get out of control with their demands, okay? Particularly the education unions. See, I can be critical of unions. And I think we need to make sure that the bonding bill is structured in a way that it's not just creating jobs in certain areas, but that it's...
He can't take you seriously in that suit. I'm just teasing. I just wanted to break the tension.
In this,
give him a chance. I didn't know you were going to take a breath or not. So give him a chance to respond here. Go ahead.
Well, with respect to the bonding bill, there are certain infrastructure needs that we have. It's absolutely important to maintain our roads and our bridges. Absolutely. Do we need a strong workforce? Absolutely. To do that, you've got to spend the right amount of money, an appropriate amount of money for K-12 education. That is critical. And it's not just about how much you spend, it's how you spend that money to make sure that we get the most out of that. Roads, bridges, education, there are a number of other things to support our infrastructure that are important. When it comes to right to work, maybe we'll just agree to disagree. I don't think anyone should be forced to be in a union, and I don't think anyone should be forced to pay union dues. And if it's one of those things where they are, it just doesn't seem right. And I don't want to mischaracterize it and put it in a different light. But if that's the case, then that's where I would stand on it.
Well, we only got 2 minutes left. But on the the senator mentioned K-12 education, and yet the DFL's been very critical of the plan that the GOP put forward to pay back the school shifts, which is only a partial payment.
Yeah, it wasn't the full thing.
Well, just a couple of quick comments on that. I think it's a great measure. I think it's a measure in the right direction. I'm actually a co-sponsor on the bill. Why is it a good measure? Why should Governor Dayton support this? Well, with the surplus that we had in February, it went to pay off half of this biennium's shift. With this measure, it would pay off the remainder of this biennium's shift, and it would revert then to what was the case when I came into the legislature. And so the remainder would be the previous DFL-controlled legislature's shift, the delay to those payments. So when I came in, the shift was this big. We did this much of a shift. We've already paid half of it off. With this measure, it would eliminate the shift that we brought in last year. And it just seems like a smart measure. Why? Because the reserve and cash flow account that we still would have after that shift was paid for would still be greater than in 8 of the past 17 years. So we would not be decimating, and it's being mischaracterized by many people that we wouldn't have any money in the cash flow account, that we wouldn't have any reserves. No, we would have almost $600 million, and that $600 million in the cash flow account and the reserves would exceed the amount that we've had in 8 of the past 17 years. So we'd still be in solid financial conditions.
Well,
and
you had an independent and a Republican in the chief's chair before that, so.
But once again, why even have a shift? I mean, that's
no argument there. No argument there.
You wouldn't have done it.
We you know, none of us. I don't think anyone really wanted to go there. But when the option was cut the pay to schools or delay it, it's a pretty easy solution. You delay it instead of cutting it. And that was where we were.
We got to wrap up the segment. One last quick question for both of you. Last legislative session was a budget balancing year. The government basically shut down, and there was an extended session. The bond rating was lowered for the state. There was 18,000 people laid off. State parks were closed. For crying out loud, the only thing that broke the impasse was the beer licenses were going to be cut off or something like that. So, Rob, what were you hearing? Were you angry that you weren't in the right office at the at the right time?
If any one individual.
You got some resentment towards the governor on that one? Or?
Not towards the governor, not completely toward the legislature, although I did.
Oh, it's easy to pick on them.
I did exchange emails with my rep, Mariani, and said, how can you take a paycheck when you're not working? You have other government state employees out of work. They're not going to get this money now. They're not going to get it in the future. I thought it was abhorrent. One of the ideas I have, I kind of come out of the box with these strange ideas, but I'd like to move the budget year to the even years and have the session wrap up end of July. So if there's a shutdown, it's fresh in the voters' minds when they go to the polls 2 months later or 3 months later, whatever it might be. I think this shutdown last year is going to be forgotten by the time people cast their ballot this year, and that behooves everyone involved. By the way, I do agree with you on the shifting, that idea. So we do agree on some things. I don't know. I don't think it. I think the legislature and the governor in particular, the governor found the right area to compromise on the budget. I don't like the way it was done, but now we got to move forward. We can't keep borrowing.
I would say I completely agree with the fact that a state government shutdown is not a good thing. It's not good for anybody, whether you're in the public sector, the private sector, whether you're at home with your kids or you're going out to work every day. That was not a good thing for the state of Minnesota. And we could point fingers, we can assess blame all over the place. I will tell you right here on your show that I accept responsibility for my part in it. I'm not going to stick my finger in Governor Dayton's eye and say it was all his fault.
Oh,
I think we
all just one finger.
We all share that responsibility. We all do our best to work together and sometimes not to work together. But in the end, a state government shutdown is not a good thing. And there are some bills that are moving through the process that would help address that in certain ways. I think we need to do what I try to do, and that's to reach across the aisle, try to work with individual members as much and as often as you can. Find those common areas, the areas that you have, that you agree. The bridges, build those bridges and continue to talk and to listen. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth. I think we should listen twice as much as we talk.
Heard that somewhere before. Anything else, Andy?
No, we're good. Thank you for joining us. Thank
you.
Rob.
Thank you, Andy.
We'll be right back with musical guest Rachel Colias and Dan Fontana right after this break.